So we're on? Okay. And they conveniently turned the mic on for me this week, so I don't have to fumble around and hope it's working. It's good to see everybody. Got a few stragglers dragging in the door there. It's good to see everybody. Good to, whether you're here in person or we can't see you, but we know you're there because you're out there online with us. We are in Luke chapter 8. If you want to be making your way over there while we get some of the last stragglers in here. Yeah, Matt, if you could pull that door too. Yes, ma'am. No. There's probably one over in the Life Center in one of the classrooms, but she needs to get where she can see a Bible. I don't know if somebody maybe either have one she can look at or go over and sit with her. Okay. I don't know. Over where? That's a songbook. Oh, yeah, that's the Bible. All righty. I got everybody equipped now. Got the doors closed. All right, we're going to be looking at the last little section of chapter 8 tonight. Depending on how long we take with it, we will get to sort of the thought that I've been throwing out there about how does all this chapter 8 really fit together, because it seems like a bunch of separate things, but I'm convinced there's some linkages there. If we don't get to it tonight, we'll get to it next week, and you'll have another week to think about it. Anyway, this last section we'll be starting in verse 40. It's another one of those fairly well-known stories. It's one that I think really appeals to us a lot. And I got to thinking about it. You know, Tim talked a couple of weeks ago about parables and which ones were the best known versus which ones were the best loved. And I think he was on to something, because I've noticed that the parables and the stories that resonate with us seem to be the ones where we really see Jesus' compassion come through. I mean, they just stick with it. I mean, parable of the sower, everybody knows it. We know all the lessons. Probably just about everybody in here could teach a class on it. But when you start listing your favorite parables or your favorite portions of the scripture, probably none of us will list that as our favorite. But raising of the widow's son, healing the centurion's servant, and tonight Jairus, and the woman who touches, you know, those, we like those because they show not only the power and the authority of Jesus, but they show his compassion. That he's not just doing it to show off or to show that he can do stuff, but because he genuinely cares about them, and he cares about us. I want to think for just a few minutes before we look at this story, though, about the idea of being desperate. I just wonder what comes to your mind when you think of the concept of being desperate. And maybe you've got a story that you're willing to share about a time when you were desperate, and what that was about and what that sort of looked like. Anybody got a story about being desperate? We're looking at a couple of people tonight who are desperate. Maybe the only thing they have in common is the fact that they're desperate. Okay. All right, well, maybe you don't have a story. What do you think of when you think of the concept of being desperate? Yeah, Austin?
The episode of The Twilight Zone with or at the end, the guys in the desert on the brink of death with a bunch of gold and no water, and he comes across a man and like just gives him the gold and begs for water and then dies on the spot.
Okay.
And then the man goes back into his car with his wife, and his wife was the man was confused as to why he was being given the gold brick, and then the wife was like, weren't they worth something all these years ago before they became able to make to synthesize gold?
Okay, I'm not sure I saw that episode, all right? The guy was desperate, though, all right? What do you think of when somebody's desperate, Mike?
And this isn't like a super serious one, but we were moving. I had moved, and so we were going to have to, find house, school, all that stuff while doing a new job and everything. And so I had kind of checked out some stuff, both like church we're going to go to and houses. And then Karen was coming up this weekend, and I didn't want to look at more houses, So my theory was I will show her the best house first. She will say, this is wonderful, I love it. And then we could go have fun the rest of the weekend doing other stuff. And so the realtor took us and we saw the first house, and Karen looked at me and said, I hope they get better from here.
Okay.
So I was desperate. We did buy that house.
Okay.
But I was desperate I'd been working by myself for months, and I was just desperate to have someone to do something with, so.
Okay. All right, for those of you just coming in, we're in Luke chapter 8, and we're thinking about what it means to be desperate.
I remember the news story a couple of years ago when the U.S. was withdrawing from Afghanistan, and a plane was leaving the Air Force Base, and citizens were running to this plane, trying to hang on to a moving plane just at a chance to get out of their country.
Okay.
They were desperate to escape that situation.
All right, good example. Mike started making the point that I'm sort of headed towards, and that's the idea that for most of us, the things we get desperate about are really not that consequential. Okay, now there may be some folks in here who have been or in situations where they're desperate. Maybe it's a healing situation, a getting treatment, it's a job situation or whatever, where genuine desperateness. But for most of us, we don't. The example I thought of was the year there was this Power Ranger toy for Christmas that our son wanted, and my wife going all over town to different stores to try to find it. And that's what we get desperate about, okay? Which doesn't have a whole lot to do with our characters in this story. Jairus and the woman who needs healing. They're desperate, okay? Let's talk about Jairus for a minute. We'll talk about the characters, and then we'll read the verses. In fact, let's read the first few verses, just sort of set the table. Verse 40 of chapter 8. And when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. And then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. All right, let's stop here and talk about Jairus. First of all, think about, it says when Jesus came back. Where had Jesus been? Last week. Okay, the other side of the lake, okay, healing the demoniac. After all of the teaching and the crowds that he was attracting on the Capernaum side, and Galilee side, he went over to the other side, and they're waiting for him. Okay, we're not told exactly how or where they are, but I've almost got the idea they're standing on the beach watching for the boat. The folks in the Gerasenes, they begged Jesus to leave because they were scared of him. These folks are standing on the shore. It's kind of a contrast there. And so this guy, Jairus, what do we know about Jairus? Okay, synagogue leader. All right. He was in charge. Tom Manley, okay? He scheduled everything, got everybody lined up. Actually, even more important than Tom, okay? All right? One of the most prestigious positions for a person to hold in this area. Okay, this was not a common everyday guy. This was an elite. This was a guy who was recognized and respected and looked up to. What else do we know about him? Had an only daughter who was about 12. Okay. So how do we know this guy was desperate? Harry?
On his knees begging Jesus to
Okay,
come see him.
all right. He's on his knees begging Jesus to come heal her. Okay.
He was part of a group that didn't have a very high view of Jesus at the time.
Okay. He was taking a risk coming to Jesus. Okay. It's only been a couple of chapters since we've read that the religious leaders, the folks in charge, are plotting to kill Jesus. And you know, synagogue leaders and those folks from Jerusalem that have come out checking him out and are there to criticize, they're watching what everybody's doing. They're watching Jesus and they're trying to catch him. They're also, everybody's following him. He risked a lot, losing some of what he had to come to Jesus. Ronnie.
Excuse me. At that point, he was willing to take that risk for the benefit of his daughter.
Okay.
So he valued his daughter more than anything else.
Okay. So what does that tell us about being desperate?
Anything it takes.
Okay. I think that word "do" are two words. Do anything. You'll do anything. Okay. And so this guy comes to Jesus. Does he come to Jesus demanding? Okay, he comes begging. He's in with a bad crowd, okay, with the religious leaders. There's the opportunity for him to think, because of who I am, and maybe he's heard the story about healing Cornelius' servant. It's like, well, I'm a Jew and I'm head of the synagogue. If he's going to heal anybody, he ought to come to my house. And that's not even on the table. It's, Jesus, you got to come. I don't want her to die. He is desperate. Okay? Anything else about Jairus before we move on? Yeah, Chris.
Real desperation, and the fact that he had seen, through stories he's heard, who knows what, these people were exposed to Jesus, whether they admitted it or not.
Okay.
And when someone you love is dying and you are desperate and you know Jesus has healed people, whether you wanted to admit it or not, whether your friends liked you for admitting it or not, this was time to say, please help.
Okay.
And I think it brought him to the point where he didn't care anymore about what they thought.
Okay. Just this whole idea of him falling to his knees. I mean, you're talking about a class of folks who valued very much what they wore and how they wore it and how they carried themselves and what sort of image that they projected, and that's all out the window. He's on his knees. Okay, let's read a couple more verses. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. So what do we know about this lady? She's desperate.
She's probably also getting crushed.
She's probably also getting crushed, okay? All right? which is, we'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, Karen?
She was considered unclean, so she was with somewhere she should not have been.
She was having to sneak in the crowd, okay? Because if anybody who knew her saw her, it's like she wouldn't get crushed. They'd move away from her because they didn't want to get unclean, okay? We're not told. Eusebius, the historian, around 300 AD, said that there were legends or stories about this woman that said she actually was a Gentile. And that after she was healed, she went back home and she erected a statue commemorating her healing and to show praise. And when, there was a Roman Caesar that came through the area trying to reestablish paganism and tore that statue down and put up a statue of himself. And within days, it had been struck by lightning and destroyed. No corroboration to that story, and based on the way this story developed, I don't know that she was a Gentile. I think in this area she was probably Jewish.
I think I think desperation brings great faith sometimes, or maybe it's just, what have I got to lose? But she clearly, she didn't approach him from the front. She just knew if I could just sneak up and touch him, that's a lot of faith, and I guess she also could say, well, what have I got to lose? But I think for it to happen, she must have really believed that it could happen.
Where did she touch him?
On the cloak.
Well, where on his cloak? The edge of his cloak. Does that mean anything? Probably on the floor. Okay, could be, not necessarily. Okay, could be, not necessarily. If you go to Numbers into Deuteronomy, under the law, men around the edges of their garments were supposed to wear tassels. And they were to be a daily reminder when they dressed of who they belonged to and whose they were. Okay, remembrance of God. This lady comes, and the way this reads is like she specifically touches the most holy place on him she can find. So it's not just, okay, maybe it'll be a magic trick here. I'll just go up and I'll touch him. There is a recognition here, I think, on her part. And it's another demonstration of her faith with where she touches him. Okay. But she's desperate. Mark tells this story, and he says, Luke the doctor leaves out what Mark says. Mark says that she went to doctors for years, and they couldn't help her. Luke the doctor didn't say that. Okay. In fact, Mark says not only did she not get better, she got worse. Okay. Now, under the law, even common menstrual bleeding rendered a woman temporarily unclean. Here's a woman who is unclean continually for 12 years. Okay. Besides the physical problem, ostracized, has to keep herself apart. There's just lots and lots of things this woman has had to deal with and put up with for 12 years. Isn't it interesting that the little girl who's sick is 12, and this lady has been suffering for 12 years? Interesting sort of parallel there. And so she, in her mind, if I can, it's almost like the centurion. You don't have to come to my house. You just say the word and she's going to get well. Same sort of faith. If I can just touch. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to single me out. Maybe I can get away with just doing that. Because it was against the law of Moses for her to touch him. She was not supposed to do that. Yeah. Jeannie.
She'd been hearing stories, I'm sure. They all were, word was spreading.
Okay.
And a desperate person, when they hear
Yep.
something or someone can help, they're going to do it.
They're going to risk anything.
That's right.
Risk anything. And so she does. And he says, verse 45, "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. What a question. Did Jesus not know? Yeah, he did. You sure? Okay, he knew power, but he didn't say, "Some lady touched me." He said, "Who touched me?" He was asking a question. He was asking a question. Okay. I think generally we teach this, so well, sure, he knew exactly who touched him. The scriptures don't tell us that, Chris.
Well, I have a little different opinion.
Okay?
I believe that Jesus did everything by the Holy Spirit
Okay.
because it says that he emptied himself and took on the form of a servant. And I think this is one of the prime examples we have of that happening, where this woman comes up to him. He was being pushed around by the crowd. He was just like any other guy walking in a crowded place, people pushing up against him, because his disciples even made that comment. "Lord, people are pressing against you all around. What do you mean, who touched you?" Of course, everybody's touching you. But because this woman had faith, and that's what he said later, power went out from him. And I don't believe it was his choice for the power to go out. I believe the Holy Spirit did that.
Okay.
And he knew it happened. So I think this is an example of the Spirit working in him to accomplish the work of God. And Jesus wasn't, it was the Spirit that was doing these things. And Jesus even said, "I do the works of my Father and him that sent me. And I speak the words of my Father and him that sent me." So to me, this is a confirmation of that truth.
Okay, and I want to talk some more about that, but let's read the next few verses, which kind of cover what you said. He says, "Who touched me?" When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, people are crowding and pressing against you. There's all kinds of people touching you, Jesus. What are you talking about?" Which is, an interesting attitude from Peter, okay? But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Do you suppose all of those other people who were jostling up against Jesus were in perfect health? That they had issues? But do you imagine that all those folks, say, oh, I'm well now, and somebody else bumps up, I'm well now. I don't think that was going on, okay? And I can go either way with this. Certainly Jesus had the power and the ability. I mean, he could read those Pharisees' minds and knew what they were thinking. He had the ability to do that. But I'm not so sure he was choosing to do that. Alex Humphrey, those of you that knew Alex, used to talk about this concept and the idea that there appear to be areas where God or Jesus can know something, but chooses not to. Okay? But I think sometimes we have a concept of Jesus where, because we want to honor him and we want to honor his divinity, that sometimes we put things on him that almost make him not human. That somehow, as the Son of God, he's walking around and in his mind, he's controlling the entire universe and all creation, while he's doing everything and he knows everything. And I don't quite think that's what's happening. And I think there are times specifically when, and again, if he's able to do that, it's hard for you to make the argument to me that he was fully human and fully divine. Okay? Because our brains get full, and we can't think of everything at once. Okay? And so this idea that somebody touched him and power went, he knew it was different because power had left and he was in tune with the Spirit. But I'm not exactly sure that it wasn't a genuine question. I think he could have turned around and looked and figured out in a heartbeat who it was that had done it. But he chooses, I think, and we'll talk about why in a minute when we read this woman's response. I'm out of the camera? Okay. All right, Tim's going to set us straight. And then back to Jeannie. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take the mic away from you.
You might be exactly right. However, this woman obviously did not want to be noticed. The disciples did not have any idea who touched her or who touched Jesus. And yet, when she could no longer go unnoticed, it could be Jesus was looking at her when he said, "Hey, who touched me?" That he absolutely knew who touched him and what her story was and what she needed.
Okay, all right. So Tim is channeling his inner Chris Sullivan and getting about 2 minutes ahead of me, but it's a good point.
Over and over, Jesus knew what people were thinking.
Yeah.
Over and over in the different scriptures. I think Jesus knew exactly, but as he does many times, he questions for their purposes or for whatever reason he has. But I think he knew exactly who touched him. And I think when we ask him, I think he knows exactly when we have the faith accompanying it and when we don't.
Yeah. I certainly think he had the ability to. Okay.
I agree with Tim and Jeannie. I believe he knew who touched him, but he used that as an opportunity to demonstrate her faith and to have her to confess, because he was with a large crowd. The same thing he did with Jairus. He used that as an opportunity to demonstrate their faith in front of others.
Okay. Ronnie and then Austin, and then we got to move on.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with everything that's been said. However, I believe that the power of God is always available.
Okay.
You just got to plug into it to receive it.
Okay.
And I think by her touching him, that was a point of contact for that power to be released.
She went to the right place. Austin?
Or he could have simply been guided by the Spirit or by the Father.
Okay.
Since we do know that there is some sense of individuality.
Yeah, okay. All right, so then we got to move on. All right.
I can't help but think that there was some part, her faith led to a holy respect of who Jesus was. And I think she fully knew that if she confronted him being unclean, that could put him in a bad situation.
Okay.
And so she came the way that she did. I think she absolutely believed that he could heal her. I don't think she had any idea how it would affect Jesus in terms of the power going out of him when she did touch him. And so I think he's now going to use that as a teaching opportunity, as he so artfully does every time.
Okay. I don't think the other people who were jostling up against him were intentionally trying to touch him. I think they were just, we're here, what's going to happen? He's back, what's he going to say? What's he going to do? This woman came with an intentionality, okay? And whether it was fear for herself or fear for the position that it would put Jesus in, she approaches him from the rear. And verse 47 says, "Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet in the presence of all the people. And she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed." What was she expecting?
She was expecting to be healed.
Well, she was expecting to be healed when she touched him. What was she expecting when she came and fell at his feet, when she got exposed and had to come and fess up that it was her?
Punishment.
Okay, all right, maybe in trouble. Maybe he's going to take it back. You know, I'm unclean. I have been unclean for 12 years. You know, this is not good. Mark?
I think she was originally hoping she could sort of do this, get away with it, be healed, and sort of sneak off back into the crowd.
Okay.
But once she was outed, I think she was, she wouldn't be trembling if there wasn't some fear for some consequence for what was about to happen.
Okay. Mike? And then we need to read another verse.
Well, clearly there was a lot of Jewish people, or almost all. So one, she's in their midst and she's not been ceremonially cleansed. So that's like a sin, right? That's against the law.
Okay.
And she's a woman. She doesn't, women aren't supposed to attract attention to themselves, and suddenly everybody's looking at her. Or like you said, maybe as people realized who it was, the crowd cleared. The crowd cleared, and she was just standing there.
I mean, this brings up the contrast between Jairus and her. They couldn't be any farther apart from one of the most respected persons in the entire community to a person nobody wanted to have anything to do with. Okay? On the one hand, from an earthly point of view, it's like, well, if there's anybody that Jesus ought to go heal, he ought to go to Jairus' house. Nobody's thinking, oh yeah, he ought to go over here and find this woman, that's been suffering for a long time. He ought to go. Nobody was thinking that. Okay, Carol.
Yeah, according to the law, if you came in touch with somebody that was unclean too, you became unclean. You had to go wash yourself, and you were unclean till sunset.
Okay.
So that made Jesus unclean.
Okay, except it didn't make Jesus unclean because she was healed instantly. Okay, and he says, hearing this, or then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, several of you have mentioned that Jesus used this as a teaching moment, and certainly he did. But I don't think that's the main thing he's doing here. Why does Jesus respond this way, and what is the implication of what he says? Chris?
I think this is another example of where God honors faith.
Okay.
He said, your faith has made you well.
Okay.
And I think that the Spirit, my position, is that the Spirit knew her and what she was doing, even if Jesus in his earthly form didn't necessarily know every thought of everybody, unless he turned his attention and God revealed it to him. But I think the Spirit knew her faith. Okay. And God, the Spirit, honored that faith and made the power move.
Okay, and so he tells her why it was that she was healed. Okay, that's good, Chris. Mark, and then Irene.
Well, the verse right before that said she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. I think he's clearing this up for her and those around that touching my physical body isn't what healed you. It's your faith that did that.
Okay, all right.
Just because you touch me, that's not the magic button to get healed.
Okay, you actually made 2 points there, and I want to come back to it. Irene.
I'm thinking that Jesus, being the benevolent man that he was and God, he was using it as a point to show how faithful she was. But also when he says, go in peace, calls her his daughter, he's showing compassion for a woman who's supposed to be considered unclean. When I look back at the way what these women had to live, how they had to live, and the fear that they had to go through, I think he was also working on that and trying to undo some of that.
Okay. This is not just a teaching moment. This is an expression of his compassion and his concern. And you're absolutely right. Calls her daughter. I mean, it's an intimate term. It's like, don't you have nothing to be afraid of. I kind of imagine him smiling when he says this. It's not, okay, well, you got away with it this time. It's, daughter, your faith has saved you. And everybody around her, this was the other point, this was the second point that you made, Mark, is that everybody around her now knows that she is clean and she is healed. And so all of the barriers that have been there with her and the community, Jesus is pronouncing, they're gone. You're clean. Go in peace. Live your life. Have a wonderful life. You're healed. Okay. All right. I think there was, yeah.
I was
Mike.
just going to say, it's kind of, I'm not looking at all of it. It seems like when people approached Jesus with faith, he responded very differently. There was the man who said, the soldier who said, you don't even need to come. You know, you can heal my son or whatever it was. And she had faith, where there's other people who said, go and show yourself to the temple. Go to the Clint. There's others, he said, go and do these things, you know, even though they were healed, but they kind of more like, if you can heal me, please do. And that's not like saying, you can, I know you can. You know, he seems to respond differently.
Jesus knew who needed the extra tender touch. He knew. And he did it. Okay, so all of this is going on. What's Jairus doing?
Don't forget about me.
What's going on? Time's a wasting. Remember, he's desperate. He has fallen at his feet in front of Jesus and begged him. And here Jesus stops and he's, talking to this woman and, asking questions and doing, we gotta go. And indeed, verse 49, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. How's Jairus feel now? Okay, broken, maybe angry, wanting to be angry. Why is that so final? I mean, it's only been a chapter or so since Jesus in this same area raised the widow's son from the dead. Why doesn't that even cross anybody's mind? Okay, nothing much more final than death. Okay, I think it's the limitations of our human finite. As much as these folks were interested in Jesus being the Messiah and what that might bring and the blessings that might bring, there was still some limitations on them really understanding who he was and how much authority he actually had. And so when somebody's dead, they're dead. Yeah, we heard this story over here about what he made, and maybe they hadn't heard the story. But they come to Jairus and say, it's over. So he doesn't even need to come. Don't waste his time. Let him go do some other things. And Jesus says, hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just believe and she'll be healed. Now, how does Jairus feel? What a roller coaster this guy is on. Okay, man, all is lost, but Jesus is back in town to come to my house. Okay, he's going to come to my house, but he stops and he heals this woman, and your daughter's dead. And then Jesus says, just believe, she'll be healed. Okay. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Why just them?
The father of the daughter was sleeping. She wasn't really dead.
Okay, all right, we're going to get to that in a minute. But Jesus goes into the room where she is and only lets the parents and Peter, James, and John come in. Okay. Maybe the room wasn't big enough for anybody else. Okay, it could be as simple as that. The room just wasn't big enough. Okay, but I think also it is Jesus is fixing to do something pretty astounding. So astounding that at the end of this story, he tells the parents, you can't tell anybody about this. I don't want you telling people what I did, because it's not time. Okay? But he's going to do something that's really astounding. Why Peter, James, and John? Imagine what ammunition that gave them when they started arguing about who was the greatest disciple. Because they're going to go with him here, they're going to go with him on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they're going to go with him on Mount Olives. Interestingly, all three occasions that have something to do with death. Okay? Why those three? Irene?
Just a guess, but I think he wanted everyone there to have great faith.
Okay.
Because when he's surrounded by great faith, he could heal better.
Okay. Certainly, Jesus knew hearts and saw potential, knew what sort of responsibilities they were going to have when he left. Okay. And for whatever reason, singled them out to expose them to some things that they could use later on. Tim, you look like you're wanting to raise your hand. No? Okay. But anyway, he takes just these guys into the room. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him, knowing she was dead. For most of us, culturally in this country, and there are some exceptions, I think, even in this room, funerals and mourning for us are pretty silent times. You know, we have a funeral service, we want to come in and we want to sit, we want to have some nice songs, we have some good memories, and there, you know, there's some crying and there's some tears. There are places in this country and in this city and even in this building where we've had funerals where there's been lots of visible and outward expressions of mourning. And from what I read, I sort of gather that even those events don't match up to what's going on here. Wasn't uncommon in Jesus' day, when you had a death in your household, you paid people to come and to weep and to wail and to mourn, because it's culturally, the more noise, the more crying, the more grief that's being expressed outwardly, it's what you're supposed to do. And so by this time, and also climactically in this time, when somebody died, you wanted them buried within a day. Because you didn't want that body sticking around for a long time. And so by the time Jesus gets there, it's only been a short period of time, man, it's in full swing. And there is weeping and wailing and mourning. This is horrible. How could this happen to this good man? You know, look at how he loves God. How could this happen to his family? All of this is going on. Jesus says, she's sleeping. And they laugh at him. Now, I don't know if these were some of the people that had seen him do some of the other healings, or if they maybe weren't and just had heard about it, but it's like, you know, throwing a demon out of somebody, healing somebody who's alive of a sickness that's there is one thing, but this girl is dead. She is gone, and this wasn't ha-ha laughter. This was the mocking, sneering. Okay, so why did Jesus say she's not dead, she's just sleeping? Why did he tell them that she was just sleeping?
Because he says somewhere else that to God all are awake, that she was sleeping. And so to God, she's not dead.
Okay. He's not lying to them, okay? He's not lying to them, but I think there's a specific reason why he tells these people that she's just sleeping. And it goes back to something I told you a couple of minutes ago. What did Jesus tell the parents? Don't tell anybody I did this. This is, I'm doing this. I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to give your daughter back to you. It's a wonderful thing, but in terms of the big picture, it's not time for this news to get out. And so I think he tells the mourners that she's sleeping. So they can come up with their own story when she walks out, and certainly they're going to talk about it because, I was there, I saw her, But I think he's downplaying this idea that he's going in to raise her from the dead, because it's not that time of his ministry yet. Not time for that to be publicized. But so interestingly, when he tells her to wake up, let's read it. They laughed at him knowing that she was dead, but he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. His parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Okay, we're out of time, so I'll just wrap up with a couple of comments. One, can you see the tenderness of Jesus here? It's not, okay, I got a chance to do this great thing, and I got my 3 closest buds in here to see it, and, we got this great teaching moment, we're going to do this. It's my child. My child, get up. Get her something to eat. I saw one commentary suggested that maybe one of the reasons he said that because the mother has been beside herself for hours and hours and gave her something to do. Go get her some food. But it's, I think, an expression of the tenderness there. And then he said, don't tell anybody. I don't want you to tell anybody. But certainly Peter, James, and John saw what he had done. And this marks, I have been a little bit critical at times about where folks have divided chapters. This brings to a conclusion, I think, a part of Jesus' ministry. And he's going to begin in chapter 9 making the slow turn of getting his disciples ready and then heading to Jerusalem knowing that he's headed to the cross. Which brings it, Matt, really quickly, and then I've got one last thing to say.
I think it's possible that there's, in between the lines here, Jairus believed, and then the girl was raised without Jesus being there. I think you can fit it in there where once Jesus gets there, they're laughing at him, even though he told them that she's not dead, she's sleeping, and maybe she was sleeping at that time after Jairus believed and Jesus healed her, perhaps remotely, and then he does wake her up.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. I have, Barclay thinks that she really wasn't dead and he just woke her up, but then Barclay tries to come up with a natural explanation for all the miracles. So he's got his own issues. She was dead at some point, okay, and Jesus raised her, got her up, got her alive. So next week we will start with how do all these things, the parable of the sower, Jesus' family coming and, wanting to, get an audience with him, to Jesus calming the storm, to healing the demoniac, to healing the woman who touched him, to healing Jairus, how do they all tie together? Okay, what's happening here, and what are the linkages? Because I think there's a reason why these stories are grouped together, and I'm interested in what you think about that, and we'll start there next week. Let's close with prayer. Thank you for all the comments. Good, great comments tonight. God, thank you for our time together tonight, for studying your word. Thank you for the compassion of Jesus that we see through these stories tonight, and his absolute authority over sickness and death, not being swayed by the crowd, but knowing and recognizing and appreciating when folks express faith. God, help our faith to go stronger. Help us to realize that in so many ways, without him, we are as desperate or more desperate than either Jairus or the lady who touched him. Help us to see sin for that and to run to you and know that just being with you, that you have the power and the authority and the grace to heal us and to save us. Please be with us as we leave now. Give us good rest tonight. Bless our examples tomorrow. And pray in Jesus' name. Amen.